Hi class, so with this video, I want to talk about the response to Jung and the archetypes. Well, for this lecture specifically, we're going to focus on the response to the female archetypes, right, since we're talking about the feminist movement. So I was thinking, I think in many ways, by nature, humans, we like to kind of understand things, right? What can we do to make things simpler? And I think one of the things is we like to put things in categories, label things. The problem, though, when you do that with people is it's definitely is problematic because people are different. So that's where we are here. So when Jung kind of came out with the archetypes, the first person, I guess, that was famous that kind of had a response to that was a French feminist, Hélène Cixous, I think is how her name is pronounced. And she, one of her biggest criticisms of Jung, I guess, was the fact that she felt that it's kind of problematic for males to be writing about women. Not that you can't do that, but there wasn't a lot of that going on. So she decided to write this book called The Laugh of Medusa, and in many ways it was a response to not only Jung, but patriarchy as well. So let's talk a little bit about this book. So the first thing was she decided to break away from the standard form. So most books of this kind would have been written in prose. Books that are trying to make an argument are written in prose, which means lines, right? Paragraphs. The Laugh of Medusa was written in poetic form. So that was kind of the first symbolic breakaway from the patriarchy, right? So we had a structure break from the form that the book was written in, which also symbolized that this book was going to break away from the rules that are bound by men. So in that book, she encourages women to write, but not just to write, but to write in a very unique way, right? Using pro-female language that kind of celebrates what women had to offer, things like that. She chose a Medusa because she kind of wanted to spin that, right? Because a Medusa has been depicted as fierce, ugly, full of rage. And if you, right, people can use her as someone not to be like, right? So if somebody has desires, right, then they would be perceived as someone who is full of rage, as someone who is ugly, right, as a Medusa. So Hélène says, no, I want you to take a closer look, right? And if you look beyond all that, you might actually see a laugh or a smile from her. Okay, so moving forward, right around the mid to late 1980s, there was a lot of other changes taking place. Many of the women writers, right, wanted to kind of rethink those archetypes. And many writers thought, well, what better way to do this than to kind of focus on children's lit? So there were lots of children's lit books that were published during the mid to late 80s. One of them by Ursula Le Guin, right? The Tombs of Atuan. And in many of these books, there was kind of like a rethinking of how a woman protagonist would be, right? To kind of break away from those barriers, those rigid stereotypes, right? That those the archetypes kind of force people to believe in. A little bit later, or actually probably right around the same time, Marvel released the Daredevil comic, and it was actually a woman by the name of Anne Nocenti, she actually became the first writer on the Marvel comic book. So I labeled this as a role reversal because we kind of actually come full circle, right? In the previous slide, we had Helene Cixous, right, who wanted women to write about women. Well, now we have a woman writer who is actually writing about a male protagonist. And shocking to me, I guess Marvel kind of had a history of kind of changing the landscape. So there were some critics that kind of thought, well, why are we rethinking these archetypes and not just trying to abolish them? So, okay, so that brings us to the focus. We are going to be reading a short story by Sandra Cisneros called Never Marry a Mexican. And this story basically discusses the female archetypes in a Mexican culture. And she kind of talks about three of them. La Llorona, I guess, is known as the bad mother. And she is the opposite of, I believe it's La Virgen de Guadalupe. She is the good mother. But the main kind of female archetype in this story is going to be, I forgot her name now. La Malinche, right? Anyway, she is known as the mother of Mexico, but more negatively, right, as the legend kind of grows and grows, she is synonymous with a deceit and betrayal. So the question that we will want to pay attention to is kind of, what does Sandra Cisneros do with these female archetypes, right? Is she using them to kind of make her reader rethink these stereotypes? Is she kind of promoting them? Is she completely against them? So these are some of the questions that I want us to think about as we read the story. So thanks for listening.